the MTV Shuga documentary series, What Makes a Man. He's also invested in solving issues around gender-based violence and happens to also act in that production, having had played the character of Saul on this hit MTV Shuga Down South series, Down South series, I beg your pardon. He's also used this process behind the making of this documentary to ask himself, what actually makes a man? We'll speak to Ayanda himself in just a moment, but first, take a look at this.
My name's Ayanda Makayi, and I'm on a journey.
I'm about to be a father.
Congratulations, madam.
I'm on a journey to explore what makes a man in this climate of GBV.
Over 2,700 women have been killed as a result.
We are fighting for our rights.
My biological father raped me.
How am I going to ensure that my child doesn't grow up to be that man?
So my journey is to go around meeting different people of different genders to unpack what makes a man.
Look at our history. It's always war.
We men really don't know how to deal with the issue.
I think what poses a problem is when people feel like they have to compensate for a lack of masculinity.
And because of that, I'm worried with how I'm going to raise my son.
Join me as I explore what makes a man. Catch the first episode of MTV Shuga, What Makes a Man, Tuesday the 1st of March at 9:30 p.m. CAT.
All right, and Ayanda himself joins us now via our video link to unpack his thoughts around this documentary series and this absolutely profound question that underpins it. Ayanda, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time for us. And first things first, congratulations in order. I understand you're also a recent dad, as we've seen in that short trailer. But on a more serious note, I mean, do you feel you've come any closer to being able to answer that question? What makes a man?
First and foremost, thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be able to not just put on a show on the TV screens, but to be able to continue the conversation in all the different platforms that we have. So thank you so much for giving us the privilege of continuing this conversation. Sure. Do you know when I started this journey, I thought I was going to walk away with answers, but I think the more I delved deep into this journey, I realized I came up with more questions. The one thing that I learned though is that being a man is not it doesn't end. You don't become a man. It's a constant journey. So we are constantly becoming a man. And so what I did learn is that it's very complex. It's unending. It's an ongoing journey, and for me, something that stood out and something that I've gone on to even tattoo on my arm, is striking the balance between femininity and masculinity for a man. If you can strike a balance by being a strong man and protect and so forth, but still know when to nurture and care and be passive and emotive. That for me is a very good start of defining a healthy man. And then many other layers then start to unravel from there.
Sure. Interestingly enough, in trying to unpack this question, you have to kind of deconstruct what manhood is in order for you to actually be able to be in a position where you can start meaningfully engaging with what being a man is about. It's almost counterintuitive and uncomfortable. But are you finding that the men that you've spoken to are open to that, to going to that place of vulnerability? Because unless you go there, there isn't really any kind of meaningful discussion that can happen around this issue.
No, exactly. I mean, in order for us to even have this conversation and get answers or even contribute towards change, we need to go to a space of being uncomfortable and a space of being vulnerable. And I think that is why we even chose some of the contributors that we do have, because we realize that in creating the idea that society gives us of what a man is very complex, but it's influenced by things like tradition, culture, race, finances, being the alpha male, and many other dynamics, sexuality. And so we needed men that not only have walked this path, but men that are willing to look back and reflect on the path. So, there was some controversy around, having brought in Bubushi and Big Zulu into the show as contributors. But we needed that conversation. We needed men who were alleged perpetrators or had been news for many numerous reasons, but who are willing to come in and say, listen, this is what I've gone through, and this is what I'm willing to share with you guys to learn from. And that's the only way we're going to move forward. We can't cancel people. Canceling people is not going to serve us anything. We need to take those people and really unpack with them so that the next person doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah. In the past, I found that a lot of these conversations, meaningful as they are, take place in some kind of echo chamber. In other words, you're speaking to the kind of men, dare I say, who are open to change and are probably already in a journey of changing themselves in any case. But, you know, the parts of our society where these conversations typically need to happen, that's actually not taking place. Is that what you've also found? Like, for instance, let me ask my question this way. Where did you get the most resistance? And do you reckon it's in those spaces where this conversation was needed most?
Look, it's a very interesting question that you put out there, because another question has come up from the documentary where people say, why did you use well-known people? Why not use, the men on the ground? And the thing is that if we don't get the people who are willing to change or willing to contribute towards change or willing to have the conversation, if we don't fully have them being the ambassadors and in the forefront and showing that, look, it's okay to want good. Being a good guy is not actually bad. It's good to be good. If we can get those voices loud and clear, the resistance will then become less and less and less. Because at the end of the day, this is all a ripple effect. This is not going to change overnight, unfortunately. But what we need to do is to ensure that we are putting conversations in every pocket so that even those that are resisting will realize that actually people around them want to have this conversation. So therefore, you end up being isolated, and isolation is not the best solution in this scenario.
Yeah. You speak about there being a ripple effect. Apologies. Looks like we're both holding to chime in. You speak about there being a ripple effect. I understand part of the things you're grappling with was the kind of father you could be to your son, so as to bring up, hopefully, a man who has embodied positive characteristics around what manhood is about. Speak to us a bit more about that journey and what your approach is in a context where there are so many moving parts, and no matter how you do it, it almost feels like there's a wrong way of going about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and almost about to tear up, because I thought ideally I could be this perfect image of a man to my son, until in the first episode of the documentary I sat down with my mother, and I reflected with her, and I told her about how I thought I failed her, and how she had raised me by ending up having a child out of wedlock, and she said, I knew you were never going to be perfect. No one's perfect. We are human and we make mistakes. And I think that's why we put pressure on ourselves so much that we think that we're supposed to be the perfect example. That's why you get parents who are overly protective and not allow kids to make mistakes. And so I think from this journey, that's what I've learned, is that I'm still going to make mistakes. But what's important for me is to reflect to my son and say, listen, I've gone and made this mistake, but this is what I've learned. So that he can be in a position to make a decision, to say, okay, well, my dad taught me that if I go down this route, these are the consequences and these are the lessons learned. Should I, or should I go the other way? And that's all I think will be beneficial for me to put to him, And I think with the show, what we've been able to do is, because the conversation continues through our peer education from here onwards and so forth, I want my son to learn that a father figure is not just me. Father figure is an uncle, a teacher, community.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I'm hoping to part with him as this journey continues.
Sure. Well, it's a question that's plagued academics, thought leaders, philosophers for decades. What is a man? And hopefully, your contribution will help us move in the right direction in trying to answer it. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate your thoughts on this. Ayanda Makayi is an executive producer, a presenter, also told an actor. Thanks once again.